Well, hey, Mountain students, welcome back to week 3 of When It Hurts. My name is Julia. I'm usually behind the camera, but today I am talking to a few friends and continuing our conversation that Hillary kicked off a couple weeks ago at Camp's Preview Night. I'm with these 3 lovely people. Let me kind of just go around. Let's introduce everybody, get to know you guys, and we'll start with you, Tracy.
Sure. My name is Tracy Olson, and I am one of the care pastors here at Mountain Christian Church, tasked with looking at connections between emotional and spiritual health and ministry.
Hi, I'm Courtney Wright. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in mental health since 2012, and I'm a practicing mental health therapist.
My name is Joseph Mahler. I am also a licensed therapist. I'm an LGPC, and I also co-own a holistic wellness practice, Evolve Wellness, and that's what I do as well.
Well, I'm really glad that you guys are here with us today. Thanks for just taking your time out, coming to talk with us. I know that this is going to be a really important conversation for our leaders and our students to hear. So let's kick off this conversation around mental health. First by talking about the idea of emotions. Emotions are around us all the time, especially when we're in middle and high school. And so what are they? What are emotions?
I'll say that I feel like a lot of people don't understand what emotions are, and they struggle to be able to identify what they're feeling. I think emotions are feelings that we have that can be caused by a certain situation or a thought.
I like to think of them as signals. So if you imagine a dashboard on a car and there's a signal that goes off, again, I like to think of it as not a right or wrong necessarily. It is a signal that something is happening somewhere and I am reacting to it.
Because it's hard to define emotions, right? I mean, you can't hold anger in your hand and look at it and define it. It's hard to kind of measure that because it's our experience, is what we're feeling inside, mm-hmm. and so that's often when I'm working with clients, and we'll talk about what is the purpose of emotions, and it's to tell you something.
Mm. If you are experiencing an emotion for an extended period of time, right? Say I am constantly angry because of X, Y, and Z. That is going to impact your mental health. You know what I mean? That is going to, maybe that is going to cause some more stress, or maybe that's going to cause more anxiety for you. It all connects.
Something that comes to my mind is, as we're saying, emotions are signals. They're telling us what's happening within us, and there can be things that are on our focus, and we're I know I'm stressed, I know I'm feeling anxious, but emotions can also come from things that we may not even be aware of, things that have just happened to us, and now we are essentially stuck with that emotional response. They can be clear and we can identify them really easy, but sometimes they're a little bit more challenging, and we're kind of just stuck with dealing with the experience of them.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking of the whole, it's a subconscious thing that is happening that we don't even realize, right? How many times does it happen to us where we're mad or we're sad and we're just trying to push it down and just put on a nice face? You know what I mean? If you continue to ignore it, it will happen. It's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. It will come out, whether or not you acknowledge it. So it's just better to acknowledge it versus ignoring it, because it can get worse and bigger, and then it becomes a volcano.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also for our middle schoolers and high schoolers, just how hard and challenging that is because of how not that there's more emotions, right? Because we're all emotional, beings. That's who we are as humans. But that the emotions can feel more intense, especially if you're feeling something and it's repeated, or it's something you're feeling for the first time.
First, I want to normalize that the goal is not to be happy every waking moment. That's not sustainable. That's not possible. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry. That is allowed. It's just, how do we express them in an appropriate manner? 1, 2, I wanted to hit on the fact that sometimes you feel anxious because something's happening, and that's okay. It's good for you to know what's going on. It's good for you to know, I'll feel less anxious after I take my math test. It's okay. just paying attention to what is causing that and like reminding yourself like, okay, this is a temporary feeling, or okay, this is more permanent because I'm still adjusting to grandpa moving into the house. Like paying attention to what is causing that and knowing what is temporary and what is not.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of middle and high schoolers are watching this and they're thinking like, yeah, I can relate to a lot of what's being said, especially what she said, Joseph, about just like the big feelings and just like feeling so overwhelmed by your emotions. Yeah, so that brings us into a good spot to start talking a little bit about the idea of self-awareness. Let's just first get a definition for that. What is self-awareness?
So I think self-awareness is when we recognize how we're feeling and what led us to that certain feeling. We might feel angry and we have to like pause in that moment and be like, okay, what happened today that has led me to this place? Okay, like what is my plan of attack? Because a lot of times when we just respond and react, we don't always react the way we would like to react.
I think it's really good. You mentioned just specifically anger, right? And anger has kind of come up a little bit today, but I love talking about anger because it's a secondary emotion, right? There is almost always something beneath it, right?
And I think often those things beneath anger are more vulnerable feeling. So the grief or the sadness, again, digging a little bit deeper is so important because often we mask those more vulnerable feelings with anger. It's just easier to come at somebody who's hurt my feelings with some anger than to say, wow, that really hurt me when you said that. That's more vulnerable. And I love that our kids are becoming a little bit more vulnerable in their willingness to express what's going on.
I think a lot of times anger can be used as a defense mechanism because it protects us, because if I'm angry, then I'm not as sad or frustrated. And I think that in society, a lot of times we praise that type of reaction versus like, it's better for you to be in tune with how you're feeling and have that healthy conversation, even though it's difficult to have. You know what I mean? That creates that healthy relationship and everyone's being heard and everyone's being able to communicate with one another.
We don't have the resources. Our society's not set up to, model those resources of how to be vulnerable and validate it. So encouraging, this generation that, man, great job for being more vulnerable because that is so needed and so good.
All this is kind of reminding me a little bit about the idea of coping mechanisms. Let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what are coping mechanisms?
So coping is how we deal with situations that require additional attention. And then coping skills are the skills that we use when we require that additional attention.
It's pretty good. I like that definition, right? Because it's what is something that needs more attention, and we can have unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? That are automatic. That you mentioned a defense mechanism before. That's a coping mechanism. It's a defense coping mechanism where I'm going to get angry to protect myself. So that's a part of the self-awareness, is recognizing that. So then you can develop and find out what are some more healthy coping mechanisms. But I like that definition because it's just what is something that just is requiring more of my attention, and it's that action of what are we doing with giving we know that there's this thing, I'm having this feeling or I'm having this experience, I'm giving it more attention. How are we giving it more attention is the coping mechanism.
So I just want to bring up a term, self-regulating. I don't know if any of us have said that yet. So self-regulating is like the ways that I'm able to calm myself down when I am, and maybe I'm feeling unstable, maybe I'm feeling like I'm about to spiral, like I'm able to like check in with myself and see what I need and like what are the things I like to do? Like I might take a moment and like meditate, or I might take a minute and say a prayer, or I might take a pause and like do something else to distract myself for a moment before I'm ready to handle a certain situation. Or I like to go for walks too. So like kind of like paying attention to like what you need through self-awareness, and then self-regulating is the process to to handle after finding out that self-awareness. I hope that makes sense.
It does, and I love you saying that, right? Where, that is such a helpful term, right? Self-regulating, where, I hope everyone that is listening to this feels, if you take anything away, is just feeling empowered. One insight that I've gotten for me recently is cleaning and washing the dishes and organizing things really helps ground me, right?
Yeah,
and what's so crazy is that may not work for someone else, for any of you, right? And so it's really about finding what does work for you. What are these like tangible things that you can do? They're like, yes, I know this helps me because for me, that makes me feel like things are more organized in my life, and I have more ability to control this thing in my life. So then if I have an ability to control this, maybe I have an ability to self-regulate, as you were saying.
It does, and I think getting back to the self-awareness and kind of doing that body scan on a regular basis every morning, if I sit down with God, I'm like, okay, good morning, God. What's going on with you? What's going on with me? What am I bringing to our relationship today? And often, if I'm not in a place of peace, I'll use a breath prayer, which I think is a real simple tool that in those moments when we need to self-regulate really help, because if I breathe in a certain way, it slows my heart rate. So again, body, mind, soul connection. So I'm now going to breathe, and my inhale is going to be shorter than my exhale. So sometimes I'll just start by counting to 4 and exhale longer. And that might be an exhale of counting to 7. And 2 or 3 of those breaths, and immediately my body chemistry changes. My heart rate will slow. And so I think that's just such a good self-regulating tool. And then, of course, connecting the spirit with it, I always want to include a scripture that's maybe a life verse for me, or a simple one of, be still. And on the exhale, I'm praying and know that I am God.
And I love how you're mentioning breath now, because that is such an easy, powerful tool that we can use. Because even when you were doing that and you did the breath, you could, I don't know if you guys felt it, but you just felt.
I started breathing as well.
Yeah,
I started slowing down my brain. I was like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yep. And then there was just this like level of calm as well, right? And that's really what, our breath, when we can just be mindful of it, intentional with our breath, where it's like, I don't know what's going on. Let me breathe. Because what that is doing is, again, we're not aware of how our body and our different organs are interacting with each other. We know that slowing your breath slows your heart rate. So start with that. Just slow the heart rate. So then you're a little bit more able to explore what's going on. What am I feeling?
I just wanted to say one more thing about self-regulating is I don't want people to feel like it doesn't work. Like there's a plethora of things for you to try. You know what I mean? You have to find what thing works best for you, and not to lose hope of finding something that helps you calm down on your own. I think it's really important to practice this as a child, because the things that you do now are the things you're going to be doing as an adult. Like I used to read a lot as a kid, and that's what I do now to help me calm down. That's what I do now to help me relax. So like practicing these healthy behaviors, healthy communication, all of these skills at a young age is the things that are going to stick with you as you're an adult.
And I used to play a lot of video games growing up. I still play a lot of video games as an adult. But that is, where, when we become more aware of how do I respond, then we can start to measure like, okay, am I just trying to escape from what I'm feeling and not be in the present moment, not connect with myself? Or am I using this as a tool for self-care? Am I using this as a tool to reconnect with myself? And that's often what we can do is, we may, as middle schoolers and high schoolers, have different things that are automatic, we just go to. And things that are automatic can easily turn into unhealthy habits, unhealthy, behaviors. But, we can, once they become mindful, then we can really take where it's like, I really enjoy playing video games. How can I use that for my mental health? And that's the cool thing really about, I loved how you said, hey, there's so many options for self-regulating. And what's great about it is what do you like to do, and what calms you down, and find that out, and just starting that process, you are starting the self-awareness journey. You are starting just being more connected with ourselves, which is not something that is really taught.
I think that comes back a little bit to the self-awareness piece that we've been talking about too. So if I implement a coping mechanism or something that I feel better in the moment, paying attention to how I feel an hour later or the next day can tell me whether or not this is a healthy coping mechanism or if this is perhaps an unhealthy, or I've used it in an unhealthy way. So for me, the vice is food. So good, healthy food, I'm stable, I'm ready to go. When I'm not feeling great, I learned in my childhood that a Twinkie makes me feel really good, or a cookie. And so I've carried that through my adulthood and realized that is an unhealthy coping mechanism. When I'm using food in a way to make my emotion numb me or make me feel happy in the moment, how do I feel an hour later? Well, if I've eaten a lot of junk, I feel pretty junky. And so I think paying attention again, being aware of how those coping skills are actually working for us is a part of the self-awareness and mindfulness needed when it comes to mental and emotional health.
I think part of the self-awareness piece is like recognizing when you do fall into those things that you're using excessively, right? Like if I'm on my phone for like 18 hours a day, like it's up to me to be like, hey, let me hold myself accountable and do less of this. You know what I mean? Because it can spiral into something a lot bigger and a lot worse.
That, again, I think can overwhelm our healthy coping mechanisms. If I just always go to the easy, automatic thing that leaves me eventually feeling drained or empty, I am overlooking the challenge of discovering what my healthy coping mechanisms are because I'm just doing the easy thing. And I'm building a habit every time I do it, which I think speaks to what you were saying, Joseph. But if I realize something is being used in an unhealthy way, then to sit and be aware of that enough and mindful enough to limit it to only healthy ways, then I'm unmasking, I'm unveiling some space there that will allow me to dig into, well, what is a healthier way of dealing with a very real and valid emotion or situation? I mean, we only have these coping mechanisms when we're dealing with the brokenness of this world, which is very real. So we all need them.
So I think part of it is like when you're being honest with yourself, it is a hard thing to do. Like you are being vulnerable with yourself. You're being true to yourself of like, this thing really does bother me, or I am doing this excessively. Like you have to be honest with yourself. And in order to be healthy with yourself, you have to be honest with yourself. You can't just like, oh, it's fine. Nothing changes.
So as we reach the end of our conversation, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about some practical ways that our students can practice some coping mechanisms. And I kind of want to talk specifically about how we could use the Bible as part of our coping strategies for positive mental health. Any thoughts about that specifically?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. I think learning the story, the narrative of the Bible, and understanding that it is a narrative about a God who is about peace and shalom. So if you start at the very beginning and you look at the narrative about the garden and the peace that was involved there, you travel to the very end, the other bookend, the book of Revelation, and you look at God's new creation and its peace. There's no more sorrow, no more death. And then every page in between is leading towards God's renewal. Things like jumping into good, healthy faith communities, key for all of that to grow. But when we get a vision of a God of peace who wants peace and wholeness for us, for our relationships, and for creation, humanity, I think that's a good place to start with mental health, right? And then I use two scriptures specifically that to me are a pathway of peace. So I'll start with 2 Corinthians 10:5, and I'll just look at the second half of that verse where it says, we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. But the key is to be mindful, right? To be aware, what is circling in my brain? So, okay, so that voice isn't God if it's accusatory. So then I shift to Philippians chapter 4, where it talks about finding peace. And so much of that is involved in prayer and taking our worries and our concerns to God in prayer with gratitude. Joseph, you mentioned gratitude before, and I think in life to practice, even as a child, begin to practice gratitude. Today's been really difficult. This happened, these were all hard. What in this day can I be grateful for? So that pathway of peace is, for me, is pretty clearly laid out in taking captive those negative thought patterns that happen to all of us. So when we catch ourselves cycling in it, turn it into prayer with some gratitude and refocus on what is good and pure and just. How can I be a part of those things? I think is a pathway in the Bible that helps us with our mental and emotional and spiritual health.
That's such a great way to close out this conversation. Thank you, Tracy. And thank you to all of you guys for coming in and talking about this. I know that it's somewhat of a daunting topic, this idea of self-awareness and how it relates to our mental health, but I think that this has been a really important conversation to have. And I just know that our middle and high schoolers and our leaders really benefited from this conversation. So Mountain students, we will see you next week for week 4 of When It Hurts. Go to groups.